She wasn't supposed to care this much about babies that weren't hers. Maria Valentina Pellegrini stood in the doorway of the nursery on the third floor of the DeLuca estate, watching the twin boys sleep in their matching white cribs, and felt her chest tighten with a fear she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Luca's breathing was shallow, rattling softly in his tiny chest. Matteo's skin had taken on a grayish pallor that no 10-month-old should ever have. Both of them were wasting away day by day, and no one in this massive fortress of wealth and power seemed able to stop it. The smell hit her first, chemical, sharp, wrong. She'd noticed it 3 days ago when she'd been assigned to deep clean the nursery, but she'd dismissed it then as leftover paint fumes from the renovation that had been completed 2 months prior. Imported Italian marble floors, hand-painted murals of Tuscan vineyards on the walls, a custom chandelier that cost more than most people's cars. Everything in this room screamed luxury, everything except the 2 dying children inside it. Maria stepped closer to Luca's crib and placed her hand gently on his tiny back. His heartbeat was there, faint but steady. She closed her eyes and let herself remember another heartbeat, one that had stopped before it ever had a chance to grow strong. 4 years ago, a cramped clinic in Brooklyn, blood on white sheets, and a nurse telling her there was nothing they could do. She'd lost her baby then. She wouldn't lose these 2 now. But speaking up meant risking everything. The job that paid her $1,800 a week, and the savings account that had finally climbed to $32,000 after 6 months of working here. The lawyer's retainer she still needed to pay if she had any hope of adopting Sophia and Marco before the state placed them somewhere permanent. Her foster sister, Lucia's children, 5 and 3 years old, waiting for her in a temporary home with a woman who smelled like cigarettes and only fostered for the monthly checks. Maria visited them every Sunday. Sophia always asked the same question. "When are you taking us home, Aunt Maria?" "Soon, baby, soon." But not if she got fired for questioning a billionaire mafia boss who'd already spent $4 million on specialists from Westmont Health, Mayo Clinic, and Crestwood Medical Center. Not if she pushed too hard and he decided a housekeeper with opinions wasn't worth keeping around. Maria pulled her hand back from Luca's crib and turned toward the door. She should leave, do her job, clean the mansion, keep her head down, let the doctors figure it out. Except the doctors weren't figuring it out. 15 specialists, months of tests, blood work, genetic panels, imaging scans, biopsies, and every single one of them had come back with the same answer. "We don't know what's wrong." But Maria knew something they didn't. She knew that Luca had gotten sick first 3 months ago, and his crib was positioned directly against the east wall. She knew that Matteo had started showing symptoms 5 weeks later, and his crib sat 2 feet closer to the same wall. She knew that both boys were always worse in the mornings after spending the entire night in this room. And she knew that the discoloration she'd spotted behind Luca's crib, a faint spreading stain that looked almost like water damage, hadn't been there before the renovation. She crouched down and ran her fingers along the baseboard behind Luca's crib. The wood felt damp, cold. When she pulled her hand back, her fingertips were tinged with something dark and powdery, mold, or worse. Her heart started to race. She stood up quickly, wiping her hand on her uniform, and glanced toward the door. The hallway was empty. The estate was massive, 23 rooms spread across 4 floors, and the day shift staff was busy downstairs preparing for the evening meal. No one would notice if she slipped into Antonio DeLuca's private study right now. No one except the man himself, and he never wanted to be disturbed. Maria had been working here for 6 months, and she'd only seen Antonio DeLuca up close twice. Once during her initial interview, where he'd looked at her for all of 5 seconds before his head of security, Enzo, had hired her on the spot. and once 3 weeks ago when she'd accidentally walked past his study and seen him standing at the window, staring out at nothing, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a photograph clutched in the other. His wife. Dead 10 months now. The same day the twins were born, everyone on staff knew the story: complicated delivery, emergency C-section. She'd bled out before they could save her. Antonio had held her hand as she died, and he'd never forgiven himself for it. He'd never even held his sons. Couldn't look at them without seeing her. Couldn't be in the same room without breaking. So he'd built them a perfect nursery, hired the best nannies, paid for the finest doctors, and then he'd locked himself away on the opposite side of the mansion and pretended they didn't exist. Maria had judged him for it at first. What kind of father refuses to love his own children? But now, standing in this poisoned room, watching 2 innocent boys fade away while their father hid from his grief, she understood something darker. Antonio DeLuca wasn't just avoiding his sons. He was running from the guilt of surviving when his wife hadn't. And that guilt was killing his children just as surely as whatever toxin was leaching out of these walls. She had to tell him, even if it cost her everything. Maria left the nursery and walked down the long hallway toward the west wing. Her hands were shaking. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She passed 2 guards who didn't even glance at her. Staff were invisible here unless they made a mistake. She stopped in front of the heavy oak door to Antonio's study and raised her hand to knock. Then she heard the sound of glass shattering inside. She froze. Silence. Then a low, broken sound, almost like a sob. Maria's hand hovered over the door. She should walk away. This was none of her business. But instead, she turned the handle and stepped inside. Antonio DeLuca stood in front of his desk, his back to her, shoulders rigid. And a bottle of whiskey lay shattered on the floor. In his hand, he held a photograph, the same one she'd seen before. His wife. Dark hair, soft smile, holding a newborn in each arm in a hospital bed hours before she died. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her, but his voice cut through the silence like a blade. Get out. Maria's breath caught. She should listen. She should go. Instead, she took a step forward. Your sons are dying. His shoulders went still, and I think I know why. Silence. Thunder rumbled outside. Rain began to streak the windows. Then Antonio DeLuca turned around, and Maria saw his face for the first time in months. Gray eyes, hollow, cold. A man who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to care about. You're a housekeeper, he said quietly. His voice was smooth, controlled, dangerous. Not a doctor. I know. Maria's hands trembled at her sides. But the doctors are wrong. He stared at her. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Power, rage, grief, all of it simmering just beneath the surface. Do your job, he said slowly, and leave medicine to the professionals. Maria thought of Sophia and Marco. She thought of her empty savings account if she lost this job. She thought of her baby, the one she'd lost, the one she still dreamed about sometimes. Then she looked at the photograph in his hand, 2 newborns, still alive in that picture, still perfect. Then watch your sons die, she whispered, while you hide from them. Antonio's hand tightened on the photograph. His jaw clenched. The air between them crackled with tension. Thunder cracked. Maria's heart pounded. She'd just gambled everything. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats too long. Maria watched Antonio's hand tighten around the photograph until the edges bent. His gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her want to step back, but her feet stayed planted on the expensive rug in his study. Rain hammered against the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere distant, and between them, the air felt charged with something dangerous. 60 seconds, Antonio said finally. His voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. Almost. Explain your theory. If you waste my time, you're done here. Maria's throat went dry. She thought of Sophia and Marco, thought of the $32,000 in her savings account that wouldn't mean anything if she couldn't earn more. Thought of the twins upstairs, barely breathing. She took a breath and started talking. The nursery smells wrong. Chemical, sharp. I noticed it 3 days ago when I deep cleaned the room. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. There's discoloration on the east wall behind Luca's crib. The baseboard feels damp, cold. When I touched it, there was black residue on my fingers. Antonio didn't move, didn't blink. Luca got sick first, Maria continued. 3 months ago, his crib is positioned directly against that wall. Matteo started showing symptoms 5 weeks later. His crib is 2 feet from the same wall. Both boys are always worse in the mornings after spending the whole night in that room. 15 specialists, Antonio cut in, his tone like ice, ran every environmental panel available, air quality, water, materials, all of it came back clean. They tested after the babies got sick, Maria said quickly. The renovation was finished 2 months before that. What if the contamination was sealed behind the walls during construction? What if it's been leaching out slowly this whole time and no one thought to check inside the walls themselves? Antonio's jaw tightened. He set the photograph down on his desk with deliberate care, then straightened and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Rage, grief, something else underneath it all. "You're a housekeeper," he said slowly. "You have no medical training, no engineering background, no reason to know anything about toxicology or construction materials. So tell me, Maria." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell whiskey and something darker. "Why do you care this much about children that aren't yours?" The question hit her like a fist to the chest. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her voice cracked. She tried again. "I lost a baby. 4 years ago. I was 24. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have anyone. And I watched my child's heartbeat stop on a monitor in a clinic that smelled like bleach and gave up on me before they even tried." The words came out faster now, raw and unfiltered. "So when I see 2 babies dying and no one listening and everyone giving up, I can't just walk away. I can't." The room went silent. Antonio stared at her. For the first time since she'd walked into this study, his expression shifted, just barely. A flicker of something human beneath all that cold control. He didn't apologize, didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he turned toward the door and said, "Show me." Maria blinked. "What?" "The nursery." Antonio grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair and shrugged it on. "Show me what you found. If you're wrong, you're fired. If you're right—" He stopped, his hands stilled on the lapels of his jacket. "Then someone has a lot to answer for." Maria's heart started to race. She nodded and turned toward the hallway. The walk to the 3rd floor felt endless. Antonio followed 3 steps behind her, silent as a ghost. Guards stationed throughout the mansion watched with visible confusion as their boss climbed the stairs toward a wing he hadn't entered in 10 months. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped the banister to steady herself and kept moving. When they reached the nursery door, Antonio stopped. Maria glanced back at him. His face had gone pale, and his eyes were locked on the doorway like it was the entrance to hell itself. "They're sleeping," Maria said softly. "They won't know you're here." Antonio said nothing, but after a long moment he stepped forward. The nursery was dim. A nightlight shaped like a moon glowed softly in the corner. Luca lay in the crib on the left, his tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Matteo was curled on his side in the crib on the right, one small hand clutching a stuffed lamb. Both of them looked so small, so fragile, so close to gone. Antonio stood frozen in the doorway. Maria watched his face, watched the way his throat moved as he swallowed hard, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides. Then she saw it. The exact moment the smell hit him. His nostrils flared, his body went rigid. And he turned his head slowly toward the east wall, and his eyes narrowed. "You smell it," Maria whispered. Antonio didn't answer. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and crouched down beside Luca's crib. He pressed his hand against the wall. Then the baseboard. His fingers came away damp. He stood abruptly and pulled his phone from his pocket. His voice was low and lethal when he spoke. "Enzo, 3rd floor nursery. Now, bring an environmental testing team. I don't care what time it is. Get them here within the hour." He paused, listened, then his voice dropped even lower. "And find out who handled the renovation contract for this room. Every name, every company, every subcontractor. I want it on my desk in 20 minutes. He ended the call and turned to Maria. His gray eyes burned. "Move them," he said. "Both cribs. Different wing. Tonight. I don't care where. Just get them out of this room." Maria nodded and moved toward Luca's crib, but Antonio caught her wrist. His grip was firm, warm. She looked up at him, and her breath caught. "If you're right about this," he said quietly, "you just saved their lives." Before Maria could respond, the door burst open. Enzo strode in, 2 guards behind him. He took one look at Antonio standing in the nursery, and his expression shifted to shock. "Boss," Enzo said carefully, "you wanted the renovation records? Who did the work?" Antonio's voice was blade sharp. Enzo hesitated. Then he pulled a tablet from his jacket and swiped through several files. His face darkened. "Russo Construction," Enzo said. "Contract was approved 8 months ago. Before—" He stopped, glanced at the cribs. "Before the Signora passed." Antonio went very still. Maria saw the way his jaw tightened, saw the way his hands flexed. Whatever that name meant to him, it wasn't good. "Get the testing team here," Antonio said softly. Too softly. "Now." He turned to Maria. His expression was unreadable. "You don't clean anymore," he said. "You stay with my sons. You don't leave their side until they're breathing normally again. Understood?" Maria nodded, her throat tight. Enzo stepped closer to Antonio and lowered his voice, but Maria was close enough to hear. "Boss, if this is what I think it is—" Enzo's voice was grim. "The twins each own 30% of the empire, per your wife's will. If something happens to them before they turn 18, that stake reverts to her family." Antonio's face went cold, dead calm. One the kind of calm that came before violence. Maria's blood turned to ice. She looked at the twins, at Luca's tiny hand curled around the edge of his blanket, at Matteo's shallow breathing, and she understood. They weren't just sick children. They were heirs worth billions, and someone wanted them dead. Antonio stepped close behind her, close enough she could feel the heat of him, close enough his breath stirred her hair when he leaned down and whispered near her ear. "If this was an accident, then we fix it and move on." His voice was soft, lethal. "But if someone did this deliberately, then my sons just became the most valuable targets in America." He paused. "And you're the only person I trust to keep them alive." Maria couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Outside, headlights cut through the rain. The environmental team had arrived. Men in hazmat suits began unloading equipment from a white van, and Maria realized with horrifying clarity that she was no longer just a housekeeper. She was now the twins' protector. And in Antonio's world, that made her a target too. A text came through at 2:30 in the morning. Maria was sitting beside Luca's crib, watching his chest rise and fall in steady rhythm, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting maybe a reminder about her Sunday visitation with Sophia and Marco. Instead, she saw a number she didn't recognize. "You should have minded your business. Now you're in the way." Her hands started shaking. She read the message twice, 3 times. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone wanted her gone. She stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor and walked straight out into the hallway. The guard stationed outside looked up in surprise, but Maria didn't stop. She moved fast toward the west wing, her pulse pounding in her throat. She didn't knock when she reached Antonio's study. She pushed the door open and walked inside. Antonio was standing at his desk with a glass of whiskey in one hand. He looked up sharply. His expression shifted when he saw her face. "What happened?" Maria crossed the room and held out her phone. Antonio set down his glass and took it. His eyes scanned the message. His jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek twitched. "When?" His voice was quiet, controlled. 2 minutes ago. Antonio stared at the screen. Then he looked at her, and his expression was colder than she'd ever seen it. "Pack your things. You're moving to the medical wing, 2nd floor, private room, guards outside your door." "Antonio, I can't." "You can." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out another phone, sleek, black, encrypted. He held it out. "This is your new number. Only 3 people have it. Me, Enzo, and Carlo, the guard stationed outside your door. No one else." Maria stared at the phone. "I need to call Sophia and Marco. I have visitation on Sunday. If I don't show up, I'll bring them here." She froze. "What?" "Your foster niece and nephew. I'll have them brought to the estate under guard. They can stay in a guest suite. You can see them safely." His gray eyes held hers. "But you can't leave. Not until we find who sent this." Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but she was terrified. Someone had her number. Someone knew what she'd done. "Okay," she whispered. Antonio nodded once. "The phone." Maria hesitated. Then she placed her old phone in his palm and took the encrypted one. It felt heavier than it should have. 3 days later, Maria had never been a prisoner before, but she recognized a cage when she saw one. The medical wing on the 2nd floor was beautiful. Cream-colored walls, soft lighting, a private room with an actual bed. But there were guards posted outside her door, 2 of them, armed. They nodded politely when she passed, but their eyes tracked her every movement. She stood at the window and looked out at the estate grounds. Rain had stopped sometime during the night, but the sky was still gray. Beyond the iron gates, the world continued like normal. People going to work, mothers taking their children to school, women who were free to walk away. Her chest tightened. Sophia and Marco had arrived yesterday. Maria had cried when she saw them. Sophia ran straight into her arms. Marco clung to her leg. They stayed in a guest suite 3 doors down, watched over by guards. But the twins were healing. That was all that mattered. Luca's color had returned. His breathing was strong. Matteo had gained weight. They smiled when Maria sang to them, and Antonio started visiting. Maria walked down the hallway toward the twins' room. The medical equipment hummed softly. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Antonio was standing at the far side of the room with his back to her. His shoulders were rigid. His hands were shoved into his pockets. He was staring at Matteo's crib. Maria stopped in the doorway. She should leave, give him space. But then his voice cut through the silence. "I can't do this." Maria's breath caught. She stepped forward. "Can't do what?" "Look at them." Antonio's voice was rough, raw. "I can't look at them without seeing her. Without remembering that she's gone because they're here." Maria moved closer until she was standing beside him. She looked down at Matteo, at his tiny fingers curled around his blanket, at the soft rise and fall of his chest. "They didn't ask to be born," Maria said quietly. "They didn't choose this. Neither did she." Antonio's jaw tightened. She wanted them so badly. Maria turned to face him. "Then stop looking at them like they're the reason you lost her. Start looking at them like they're the reason you still have something to live for." Antonio's gray eyes locked on hers. The pain in them was so raw it hurt to witness. "I don't know how to do that," he said. Yes, you do. Maria reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold. She guided his hand toward Luca's crib. He resisted at first, his body going tense. But she kept her grip firm. You just have to stop running from it. She placed his hand on Luca's back. The baby's heartbeat pulsed beneath Antonio's palm, steady, strong, alive. Antonio went very still. His breath hitched. His hand trembled, but he didn't pull away. He's real, Maria whispered. He's here, and he needs you. Antonio stared down at his son, and for the first time since Maria had met him, she saw his walls crack. Not break, just crack. Enough to let something human bleed through. I wanted to feel loved again, Antonio said quietly. His voice was barely audible. After she died, I couldn't feel anything. I thought if I stayed numb long enough it would stop hurting. But it never did. It just made everything hollow. Maria's throat tightened. She didn't pull her hand away from where it rested over his. Your sons love you, she said, even if you haven't let them show it yet. Antonio turned his head and looked at her, really looked at her, and the air between them shifted, changed, became something else entirely. They were standing too close. His hand was still under hers. His breath was warm against her face. She could see the exact moment his gaze dropped to her mouth and then back to her eyes. The tension between them crackled. Maria's heart started to race. She should step back. This was her boss, the man who held her life in his hands. But she didn't move. Neither did he. Antonio's free hand lifted slowly and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. His touch was gentle, careful. This can't happen, he said softly. I know, Maria whispered. You work for me. You're under my protection. The power imbalance alone makes this wrong. I know. But neither of them moved. Antonio's thumb traced the line of her jaw. His eyes searched hers. Maria's pulse hammered in her throat. Her skin burned where he touched her. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to lean closer. Then Luca made a small sound in his sleep, and the spell broke. Antonio pulled back abruptly. His hand dropped from her face. He stepped away and turned toward the window, his shoulders rigid, his walls slamming back into place. Maria stood frozen. Her cheeks were flushed. Her breathing was too fast. The door opened and Enzo strode in. His expression was grim. Boss, we have the lab results. Antonio turned. His face was unreadable again. Cold, controlled. And? His voice was blade sharp. Enzo pulled out a tablet. The contamination wasn't accidental. The materials used were deliberately chosen. Banned substances mixed with legal ones to mask detection. Someone paid for this. Someone wanted the twins dead slowly enough that it would look like natural illness. Maria's blood ran cold. Antonio stared at the tablet. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened until his knuckles went white. Russo construction? He asked quietly. Enzo shook his head. Their work was clean. Materials matched approved specifications. Independent lab confirmed the contamination was introduced after the renovation was completed. Someone with access to the estate, Antonio finished. His voice was lethal. Someone I trusted. Maria's breath caught. She looked at the twins, and she realized the enemy had been living among them this whole time. Enzo's phone rang, and he answered, listened, and his face drained of color. Boss, we have a problem. Your late wife's father, Rocco Moretti, was just flagged at Mount Sinai Hospital. He collected the twins' complete medical records under false authorization an hour ago. The room went silent. Maria's heart stopped. Rocco Moretti, Antonio's father-in-law, the man whose daughter had died giving birth to these babies, the man whose family stood to inherit 30% of Antonio's empire if the twins died before they turned 18. Antonio's voice went deadly calm. Find him, now. Maria looked at Luca and Matteo sleeping peacefully in their cribs. The contamination was introduced after the renovation. Someone with access, someone with motive. And now the man who stood to gain the most had just stolen the twins' medical records. Maria had seen dangerous men before, but she'd never seen one walk into a trap, knowing he might not walk out. Rocco Moretti arrived at the estate gates in a black Mercedes with tinted windows and 2 lawyers in the back seat. Security reported it to Antonio within seconds. Maria watched from the hidden observation room as Antonio's expression went cold and still, the kind of still that came before violence. "Let him in," Antonio said quietly. Enzo looked at him. "Boss, if he's armed—" "Let him in." Antonio's voice was blade sharp. "I want this finished." Maria pressed her hands against the bulletproof glass. Her heart was racing. She'd argued with Antonio for 20 minutes about being here. He'd wanted her locked in the secure wing with the twins. Safe. Hidden. But she'd refused. If Rocco said something only the poisoner would know, she'd catch it. She had to be here. Antonio had finally agreed, but only behind the glass, only with an armed guard at her back. Now she watched as Rocco Moretti was escorted into the office. He was tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. He walked like a man who owned the world and was about to take back what someone stole from him. The door closed behind him. Enzo stood to Antonio's left. 4 guards positioned at the exits. Rocco stood in the center of the room and looked at Antonio with pure contempt. "You've kept me from my grandsons for 10 months, Rocco said. His voice was cold, controlled. "I'm taking them. Today." Antonio didn't move. "You're not taking anything that belongs to me." "They don't belong to you." Rocco's voice rose. "You can't even look at them. You abandoned them the day they were born. My daughter died giving you heirs, and you repaid her by locking them away like dirty secrets." Maria's hands tightened against the glass. She could see the muscle twitching in Antonio's jaw. "Did you poison them, Rocco?" Antonio's voice was quiet. Deadly. "Did you contaminate the nursery so you could inherit the 30% stake when they died?" Rocco's face went red. "How dare you accuse me of—" "Answer the question." "You're trying to frame me," Rocco shouted, his hands clenched into fists. "You know you're guilty. You let my grandsons waste away because you can't face what you did. You killed my daughter, and now you're trying to blame me for your own failures as a father." Antonio stood slowly. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "You'll never touch my sons. If you poison them, you'll answer for it." "Prove it," Rocco sneered. "You have nothing but suspicion and your own guilty conscience." The tension in the room was suffocating. Maria could barely breathe. She watched Antonio's hands, watched the way his shoulders were rigid, watched Enzo shift his weight slightly, ready to move. Then Rocco's hand went to his jacket. It happened so fast Maria almost missed it. 1 second Rocco was standing there. The next he had a gun pointed directly at Antonio's chest. "I'm taking my grandsons," Rocco said quietly. "Now, or I'll take your empire by force." Enzo's weapon was out in a heartbeat. The guards moved, but Rocco already had the advantage. Clear shot, steady hand. "Surrender the children to me," Rocco said, "or I'll kill you right here and claim self-defense. My lawyers are already filing for emergency custody. All dead or alive, Antonio, I'm taking what belongs to my bloodline." Antonio didn't flinch, didn't blink. He stared down the barrel of the gun with the same cold authority Maria had seen him use to command entire rooms of dangerous men. "Pull that trigger," Antonio said softly, "and you'll never leave this estate alive. My sons stay with me." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She wanted to scream, wanted to run into that room and pull Antonio away, but the guard behind her had his hand on her shoulder, holding her in place. Rocco's hand trembled. His finger rested on the trigger. Enzo had his weapon trained on Rocco's head but couldn't shoot without risking Antonio. The room was frozen, waiting, one breath away from death. Maria's mind raced. She had to do something, had to break the standoff. Had to get Antonio out of that room. Then she remembered the twins sleeping 2 floors below, and she made a choice. She shoved past the guard and slammed through the door into Antonio's office. "Antonio!" Her voice cracked with panic. "The twins! Something's wrong. They're having trouble breathing. We need to get to them now!" Every head turned toward her. Antonio's face went white. All the cold calculation vanished, replaced by pure terror. "What?" His voice was raw. "They can't breathe properly. I don't know what's happening, but we need to move now." Antonio didn't hesitate. He turned toward the door. Rocco forgotten. Gun forgotten. His sons were dying and nothing else mattered. "Don't move, Antonio." Rocco's voice was sharp, deadly. The gun clicked. "Lem, you walk out that door and I'll shoot you in the back." Antonio kept walking. Didn't stop. Didn't turn. His voice was ice cold. "Then shoot!" Maria saw it happen in slow motion, saw Rocco's face twist with rage, saw his finger squeeze the trigger, saw the muzzle flash. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She threw herself at Antonio, shoved him sideways with all her strength, felt his body stumble, felt the bullet that was meant for his spine tear through the air. Then pain exploded through her chest. The impact slammed her backward. Her legs gave out. The floor came up fast and hard. She heard gunshots, multiple, rapid fire, heard Enzo shouting, heard Antonio's voice roaring her name. Then he was there, catching her before she hit the ground completely, and his hands pressed against her chest where the warmth was spreading, where the pain was sharp and bright and consuming. Maria tried to speak, tried to tell him the twins were fine, that she'd lied, that she just needed to get him out of that room alive. But blood bubbled at her lips instead of words. Antonio's face was above hers. His gray eyes were wide, terrified. She'd never seen him look like that before, like the world was ending, like he was breaking. "Stay with me," he was saying. His voice sounded far away. "Maria, stay with me. Don't you dare leave me. Don't you dare." She wanted to reach up and touch his face, wanted to tell him his sons needed him, wanted to tell him she was sorry for lying. But her arms were too heavy. Her vision was blurring at the edges. Behind Antonio, through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, she saw Enzo dragging something across the floor, a body, Rocco's body, blood trailing behind it. Dead or alive, she couldn't tell. The darkness pulled at her, strong, insistent. Antonio's hands were warm against her chest, pressing down, trying to stop the bleeding, but there was so much blood. Too much. "I've got you," Antonio whispered. His voice cracked. "I've got you. Just stay. Please stay." Maria wanted to stay, wanted to fight, but the darkness was stronger. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Antonio's face, the terror in his eyes, the way his mouth formed her name, and she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like peace. He loved her, and she just died saving him. Maria woke to pain and the sound of someone crying. Her chest felt like it was on fire. Every breath was sharp, burning, wrong. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond, heavy, numb, like she was drowning in something thick and dark. The crying got louder, closer. She forced her eyes open. The light was too bright. Everything was blurred. White walls, machines beeping, medical equipment, the estate's private hospital wing. Then she saw him. Antonio was sitting beside her bed, with his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. His shirt was covered in blood. Her blood. And he was crying like a man who'd lost everything. Maria tried to speak, but her throat was raw. She managed a sound. Small. Broken. Antonio's head snapped up. His gray eyes were red. Swollen. When he saw she was awake, something in his face shattered. "Maria," his voice cracked. He grabbed her hand. His fingers were cold, trembling. "Don't move. Don't try to talk. You're okay. You're going to be okay." She wasn't okay. She could feel it, the wrongness spreading through her body, the fever burning under her skin, the way her heart was beating too fast and too weak at the same time. "The twins," she whispered. Her voice barely worked. They're safe." Antonio's grip tightened on her hand. "They're fine. You saved me, Maria. You took a bullet meant for me. Why would you do that? Why would you throw yourself in front of death for someone like me?" "Because I love you," Maria thought. But she didn't have the strength to say it. The door opened. Dr. Castellani walked in with a tablet and a grim expression. He looked at Antonio, and his face said everything. "And the bullet damaged tissue near her heart," the doctor said quietly. "We stopped the bleeding, but the wound is infected. Her body is fighting sepsis. She needs a specific antibiotic. We don't have it here. Someone needs to retrieve it from the hospital." Antonio stood immediately. "I'll go. Boss." Enzo appeared in the doorway. His face was tight. "Rocco is dead, but we found an encrypted phone on him, messages to someone inside the estate. The accomplice is still here." Maria's heart stuttered. She tried to sit up, but pain exploded through her chest. Antonio pressed her gently back down. "Stay still," he said. His voice was rough. "I'll handle this." "The twins," Maria whispered again. Fear gripped her. "If someone's still here, I moved them," Enzo said. "Off estate, safe house. No one knows the location except me and 2 guards I trust with my life." Antonio's jaw tightened. "You moved my sons without telling me." "You weren't thinking clearly." Enzo didn't back down. "I had to protect them." For a moment, Maria thought Antonio might hit him. His hands clenched into fists. His whole body went rigid. But then he exhaled slowly and nodded once. "Keep them safe," Antonio said. "Whatever it takes." A small voice came from the hallway. "Is Aunt Maria going to die like Mama did?" Maria's heart broke. Sophia. Her 5-year-old foster niece was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. Marco clung to her hand, his thumb in his mouth. Antonio looked at Maria, then at the children. Something shifted in his expression. He walked over to Sophia and knelt down to her level. "Or your Aunt Maria is strong," Antonio said quietly. "She's going to survive, I promise you." "Mama promised too," Sophia whispered, "but she didn't come back." Antonio's throat moved. He glanced at Maria. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that was eating her alive from the inside out. "I won't let her die," Antonio said, and Maria heard the steel in his voice, the absolute certainty. "I'm going to get the medicine she needs, and when I come back, she'll still be here. Do you understand?" Sophia nodded. Marco started crying. Antonio stood and looked at Enzo. "Guard her with your life. If anyone tries to get near her—" "I know," Enzo said. Antonio walked back to Maria's bedside. He leaned down close. His hand cupped her face gently. His thumb traced her cheekbone. And for the first time since she'd met him, and she saw him completely unguarded, raw, terrified. "Don't die while I'm gone," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "I haven't told you yet that I love you." Maria's breath caught. She wanted to say it back, wanted to tell him she loved him too. But her vision was blurring again. The fever was pulling her under. Antonio pressed his lips to her forehead. Then he was gone. Maria tried to stay awake, tried to fight the darkness. But it was so heavy, so strong. She heard Enzo talking to someone, heard footsteps, heard the door close, then silence. Her chest hurt. Her breathing was shallow. The machines beeped faster. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She tried to open her eyes, but they were too heavy. Then she felt it. A hand on her arm, adjusting something. The IV line. A voice. Soft. Familiar. "I'm sorry." Or, "But you saw too much, and Rocco failed." Maria's eyes snapped open. She saw a face above her, someone she recognized, someone she'd trusted. The IV line dripped something dark into her vein. Poison. Maria tried to scream, but no sound came out. Tried to reach for the call button, but her arms wouldn't move. The person smiled. Sad, apologetic, but determined. "It'll be quick," they whispered. "Better this way than letting you testify." Maria's vision tunneled. Her heart stuttered. The machine started screaming. The person walked calmly toward the door. Then it burst open. Enzo stood there with his gun drawn. His face went white when he saw Maria convulsing. Saw the IV line. Saw the person trying to escape. "Don't move!" Enzo's voice was lethal. But Maria couldn't hear anymore. Couldn't see. And the poison was spreading through her veins. Burning. Destroying. Her last thought before the darkness swallowed her completely was of Antonio's face, the way he'd looked at her, the words he'd said. "I love you." And she'd never gotten to say it back. Maria's heart stopped twice before they brought her back. She didn't know that. Didn't know Enzo had ripped the poisoned IV line from her arm with seconds to spare. Didn't know Dr. Castellani had administered the antidote while her heart flatlined on the monitors. Didn't know Antonio had driven through 3 red lights and nearly crashed twice, racing back to the estate with the antibiotic clutched in his blood-stained hands. All she knew was darkness and the distant sound of someone crying. The voice was familiar, broken, desperate. "Please don't leave me, not like this." Antonio. Maria wanted to reach for him, wanted to open her eyes and tell him she was still here, still fighting, but her body was so heavy, so tired. The darkness pulled at her like quicksand, and she didn't have the strength to resist. "You took a bullet for me," Antonio whispered. His hand was warm around hers. "Why would you do that? You had Sophia and Marco. You had a life, and you threw yourself in front of death for someone who didn't deserve it." "You deserved it," Maria wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. "My wife died during delivery." Antonio's voice cracked. "Hemorrhage. It happened so fast. 1 minute she was holding my hand, the next she was gone, and I couldn't do anything, couldn't save her, couldn't protect her." Maria felt his grip tighten. "I can't lose you the same way," he said. "I can't watch you slip away and be powerless again. So you have to fight, Maria. You have to come back." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I love you, and I should have told you that when you could hear me." Something shifted inside Maria. A spark. A pull. Then she focused on his voice, on the warmth of his hand, on the steady beep of the machines keeping her alive. Her fingers twitched. "Maria!" Antonio's voice went urgent. "Doctor!" Footsteps rushed into the room. Dr. Castellani's voice. "Her vitals are improving. Brain activity spiking. The antibiotic is working. She's going to survive? If she keeps fighting like this, yes." Maria felt Antonio's lips press against her forehead, felt the wetness of his tears on her skin. "Keep fighting," he whispered. "Come back to me." Time passed. Maria couldn't measure it. Just floated in the gray space between consciousness and sleep. Sometimes she heard voices, Sophia asking when Aunt Maria would wake up, Enzo giving orders, machines beeping steadily. Then Sophia's small voice, close and clear, "You have to go see the babies. Aunt Maria told me you love them." A long pause. Then Antonio's rough voice, "I do." "Then go, I'll stay with her." Antonio's hand squeezed Maria's one more time. "Come back to me," he whispered, and then he was gone. Maria wanted to call him back, but she couldn't, and deep down she knew this was right. Antonio needed to be with his sons, finally. When he walked through the door, his chest tightened. Luca and Matteo were in a playpen near the fireplace. 10 months old now, no longer the gray, sickly infants wasting away in the poison nursery. Their cheeks were full, their skin had color, they were healthy, and they looked up when Antonio entered. Luca's gray eyes, Matteo's curious stare. Antonio's throat closed. He'd avoided them for so long, hidden from them. But standing here now, looking at his sons, he couldn't remember why. He crossed the room slowly and knelt beside the playpen. His hands were shaking. Luca reached for him, tiny fingers grasping. Antonio picked him up carefully. The weight of his son in his arms felt foreign, terrifying, but also right in a way that made his chest ache. "I'm sorry," Antonio whispered. His voice broke. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Luca's small hand patted his cheek. Antonio pulled Matteo into his other arm, held both of them close, and for the first time in 10 months he let himself cry. Really cry. Not the silent, controlled grief he'd carried alone, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body, his sons, his boys, alive because Maria had refused to give up on them. He sat in the rocking chair and held them, fed Luca a bottle, changed Matteo's diaper. Did all the things he should have been doing since the day they were born. Then he remembered something. A melody. Old. Half forgotten. His mother used to sing it to him when he was small, before she died, before everything got hard. Antonio's voice cracked when he started, awkward, uncertain. But the words came back slowly, a lullaby in Italian, soft, gentle. Luca's eyes fluttered. Matteo's breathing steadied. They'd never heard their father's voice before, never been held by him, never known he could be gentle. But now they did. Antonio sang until both boys fell asleep in his arms, until his voice was steady, until the melody felt like something sacred passing from one generation to the next. "Your mother wanted you so badly," he whispered to their sleeping faces. "She would be so proud of you." He paused. "And there's someone else, Maria. She saved your lives, and if she survives, she's going to be part of this family. I promise you that." His phone buzzed. Antonio carefully shifted the twins and answered with one hand. Unknown number. "Hello, Antonio." A woman's voice, cold, calm. Elena Russo. "I hope you're enjoying your time with your sons, because it's about to end." Antonio's blood turned to ice. "I planted C4 in the medical wing." Elena continued. "Maria's room. Enough to level the entire floor. You have 1 hour to decide. Surrender your sons to the Moretti family, or I detonate the explosives. Choose wisely." The line went dead. Antonio stared at his phone, then down at Luca and Matteo sleeping peacefully in his arms. No. He speed-dialed Enzo. It rang twice. "Boss?" "Elena Russo just called. She planted a bomb in the medical wing. Maria's room. We have 1 hour." Silence. Then Enzo's voice, tight and controlled. "I'll start the search now. If you evacuate and she sees it, she'll detonate early. You need to find it without her knowing." "Understood. What do you need?" "Pull up the security footage from when Maria was poisoned. Elena didn't have much time. The bomb has to be somewhere close." Antonio heard Enzo typing, pulling up cameras remotely. "Got it. Reviewing now." A pause. "There." She turned left toward the supply closet after leaving Maria's room, 2 doors down. "Send guards, quietly." Antonio waited, his heart pounding. Luca stirred slightly in his arms. Matteo's tiny hand gripped his finger. Enzo's voice came back. "Found it. C4, timer active. 45 minutes remaining. Can you disarm it?" A long and terrible pause. "No, not without specialist training. Bomb squad won't get here in time. One wrong move and it detonates." Antonio closed his eyes, saw Maria's face, the way she'd thrown herself in front of the bullet, the way her blood had soaked through his hands. He looked down at his sons, at Luca's peaceful face, at Matteo's tiny chest rising and falling. He couldn't choose. He couldn't surrender his children. He couldn't let Maria die. But Elena had backed him into a corner where someone he loved would be destroyed, and he had 44 minutes to find a way out that didn't exist. Maria woke to the sound of Antonio's voice saying he was going to kill Elena Russo. She heard it through the radio on Enzo's belt, heard the cold fury in his tone, heard the way his words cut through the static like a blade. "I'm coming back. Keep Maria alive. I'll find Elena and end this myself." Maria's eyes snapped open. The medical wing ceiling was white, sterile. The machines beside her bed beeped steadily. Her chest burned where the bullet had torn through. Dr. Castellani was at her bedside. He looked down when she stirred. "You're awake. Don't try to move." "Antonio," Maria's voice was raw. "Where is he?" "On his way back. Elena Russo planted a bomb in this wing. We have less than 40 minutes. Maria's heart stopped. "Evacuate." "If we evacuate and she sees it, she detonates early. And you can't be moved." The doctor's face was grim. "We wait." The radio crackled. Enzo's voice. "Thermal signature confirmed. East perimeter. She's watching the medical wing." Maria closed her eyes. Elena was out there. Antonio was walking into a trap, and Maria could do nothing but lie here and wait. "Boss arriving now," a guard's voice said through the radio. "Moving into position." Time crawled. Maria listened to fragments of communication, guards surrounding the target, Enzo setting up overwatch, Antonio approaching alone, then his voice, cold and lethal. "Elena Russo, step out where I can see you." Silence, then a woman's voice, calm, amused. "Hello, Antonio. Come to make your choice?" "The only choice I'm making is how you die." Big words for a man whose lover is about to be blown to pieces. Elena laughed. "I have the detonator. One button, and Maria dies." Maria's breath caught. "You want to live?" Antonio's voice shifted, became controlled. "Give me the detonator and the disarm code. I'll let you walk away." Elena's laugh was sharp. "You think I'm stupid? The second I hand it over, you'll kill me." "You have my word. Your word means nothing." Elena's voice hardened. "Surrender your sons to the Moretti family or I press this button. 30 seconds. "I'm not giving you my sons." "Then she dies. 10 seconds. "Wait," Antonio's voice cracked. "Wait. 5. A gunshot cracked through the night. Maria flinched. The machine screamed. "Detonator dropped." Enzo's voice exploded through the radio. "Boss caught it. Target down." Dr. Castellani grabbed the radio. "Status?" "Shoulder wound. She's bleeding out." "A boss is interrogating her now." Antonio's voice came through, urgent. "Elena, I can get you a doctor. You'll live. Just give me the disarm code." Elena's voice was weaker, pain-filled. "I'm bleeding out. Dead either way." "Then give me the code and I'll make sure you don't die alone in the cold. You'll go peacefully, or I leave you here to bleed out in agony for the next 10 minutes. A pause. Then Elena, fading. Medical supply room, second panel, blue wire, then red. Enzo, copy. Moving now. Maria heard footsteps in the hallway, heard Enzo throw open the supply room door. Timer shows 16 minutes, cutting blue wire now. Silence. Blue wire cut, proceeding with red. Maria couldn't breathe. Red wire cut. A pause. Timer stopped. Bomb disarmed. Maria collapsed against the pillows. Tears streamed down her face. They were safe. But through the radio, Elena's voice came again. Wet, dying, laughing. "You think this was all my idea?" She coughed blood. "You think Rocco came up with this?" "What are you talking about?" Antonio's voice was sharp. "Your wife." Elena's words came slower now, fading. She knew she was going to die. The doctors told her, months before the twins were born. Silence. She knew she wouldn't survive delivery, and she planned all of this anyway. "You're lying." Antonio's voice was barely audible. "The 30% inheritance, the poison, the alliance with my family." Elena coughed again. "She told Rocco everything before she died, gave him instructions. She wanted you destroyed, Antonio, wanted you to blame yourself forever, wanted you so broken you'd never recover. No, Antonio's voice cracked. She loved me. She wanted our children. She didn't care about the children. Elena's laugh turned into a gurgle. She was dying anyway. She just wanted to make sure you suffered for the rest of your life, wanted you weak, alone, never moving on, never loving anyone else. That's not true. You're lying to hurt me. Check my phone. Elena's breathing was shallow, rattling. Passcode 7193, recordings folder. Her voice, Rocco's, all of it. A long silence. Then Antonio's voice, hollow. Why? She wanted the Russo family to take over once you were too broken to fight back, and she wanted to make sure no other woman would ever have you. Elena's final words were barely a whisper. She put her own sons in harm's way just to guarantee you'd never forget her. The woman you loved was a monster. Silence. Then Enzo's voice, unshaken. She's gone, boss. Maria heard nothing but static, then movement. Enzo's footsteps coming back inside. He appeared in her doorway. His face was white. What happened? Maria whispered. Enzo crossed the room, held out Elena's phone. His hands were shaking. Antonio found the recordings, listened to all of them. His wife's voice, clear as day, explaining the whole plan to Rocco. No, Maria's voice broke. She orchestrated everything, the inheritance trap, the poison. She wanted Antonio broken, and she got exactly what she wanted. Enzo's eyes were dark. He's still out there. Won't move, won't speak. I've never seen him like this. Maria tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her chest, but she forced herself upright. I need to see him. You can't walk. Then help me. Enzo moved to her side, wrapped an arm around her waist. Together they moved slowly through the hallway. Every step was agony. Maria's vision blurred, but she kept moving, out into the cold night, toward the woods. She saw him before they reached him. Antonio was on his knees in the dirt beside Elena's covered body. His shoulders were shaking. His hands were pressed against his face, and the sound coming from him was something Maria had never heard before. Raw, broken. A man shattering from the inside out. Everything I believed was a lie. His voice was hoarse. Destroyed. 10 months. I grieved for a woman who wanted me dead inside. I blamed myself for a death she orchestrated. I avoided my sons because of guilt she manufactured. Maria pulled away from Enzo, took shaky steps forward. Antonio. He didn't look up. No, she told Rocco to make sure the twins were poisoned slowly, so it would look natural, so I'd be too consumed with grief and guilt to notice. His voice broke completely. She was willing to kill our children just to make sure I'd suffer. Antonio, look at me. I can't. His hands dropped. His face was wet with tears. I can't look at anything. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know who I am. Everything I thought I knew. Maria dropped to her knees beside him, despite the screaming pain in her chest. She grabbed his face and forced him to look at her. I'm real, she said. Her voice was firm, strong. Right now, me and you, this is real. Antonio's eyes were hollow, empty. How do I come back from this? How do I look at my sons knowing their mother wanted them dead? How do I trust anything again? You start by letting me in. Maria's hand stayed on his face. You start by understanding that not everyone is her, that love doesn't always destroy, that some people stay. She was carrying my children and planning my destruction at the same time. Antonio's voice cracked. What kind of person does that? A broken one, a selfish one. Maria's thumbs wiped away his tears. But she's gone, and you're still here. Your sons are still here, and I'm still here. Antonio's hands came up and gripped her wrists. Why? Why would you stay after everything? After I almost got you killed? Because I love you. Maria's voice was steady, certain. Not the version of you that you thought you had to be for her, not the grief-stricken man hiding from his sons. I love the real you. The one sitting in front of me right now, broken and honest and human. Antonio pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and he broke, completely. Sobbed into her shoulder like a man who'd been holding everything together for too long and finally had permission to fall apart. Maria wrapped her arms around him, ignored the pain in her chest, held him while he shattered, whispered into his hair, "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." They stayed like that in the cold dirt, surrounded by death and betrayal, but holding on to something real, something true. And slowly, Antonio's breathing steadied. His grip loosened slightly. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do." Maria's hands cupped his face. "You deserve to be loved for who you are, not manipulated, not destroyed, loved." Antonio's forehead pressed against hers. "I'm so broken." "Then let me help you heal." And in that moment, kneeling in the darkness with Elena's body nearby and the weight of betrayal crushing down on them, something shifted. Antonio's hand found Maria's, their fingers interlaced, and they held on. Maria felt Antonio's walls go up the moment he carried her back inside. His arms were gentle as he lifted her from the cold ground. His steps were careful as he walked through the estate back toward the medical wing, but his face was empty, closed off, like he'd locked every emotion behind a door and thrown away the key. "Antonio," Maria whispered. Her chest ached from more than just the torn stitches. "Talk to me. You're bleeding." His voice was flat, controlled. "We need to get you to the doctor." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." Antonio's grip tightened slightly. "You tore your stitches coming out there. You could have died." "I had to." "I know." His jaw clenched. "And I'm grateful. But right now, you need medical attention." Maria wanted to argue, wanted to make him look at her, make him feel something. But the emptiness in his eyes stopped her. Dr. Castellani was waiting when they arrived. He took one look at Maria's blood-soaked gown and gestured to the exam table. "Lay her down, carefully." Antonio set Maria down like she was made of glass. Then he stepped back, put distance between them. The doctor examined her. 3 stitches torn, minor internal bleeding. Nothing catastrophic, but it needs to be repaired immediately. "Do it," Antonio said from across the room. Maria watched him while the doctor worked, watched the way he stood with his arms crossed, the way he stared at the wall instead of at her, the way he'd retreated into himself. The local anesthetic made everything numb, but Maria barely felt it anyway. All she could focus on was Antonio, or on the man who'd broken apart in her arms 20 minutes ago and was now a stranger. When the doctor finished, Maria was too exhausted to fight. She let herself sink into the pillows and closed her eyes. She woke hours later to the sound of Antonio's phone ringing. He was sitting in the chair beside her bed, still there, but so far away. He answered quietly. "Yes?" A pause. "How long?" Another pause. His hand tightened on the phone. "I'll be there soon." He hung up and sat in silence. "What's wrong?" Maria asked. Her voice was hoarse. Antonio didn't look at her. "The twins. They've been crying for hours, won't eat, won't sleep." Maria's chest tightened. "Then go to them." "I don't know how." Antonio's voice was barely audible. "I don't know how to look at them and not see her, not see what she did, as what she planned." Maria reached for his hand. He let her take it, but didn't squeeze back. "They're innocent, Antonio. They didn't choose any of this." "I know that." His voice was hollow. "But knowing it and feeling it are different things. You held them before. You sang to them. You felt love. That was before I knew." Antonio finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. "Before I knew their mother wanted them dead. How do I separate them from that?" By remembering they're not her. Maria's grip tightened. They're yours, and they need you. Antonio stood, pulled his hand away gently. I should go. He walked toward the door, stopped, didn't turn around. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Then he left. Maria lay in the darkness and felt the distance between them growing. And the next 3 weeks fell into a pattern that broke Maria's heart a little more each day. Antonio came to visit every morning. He brought the twins. Let Maria hold them. Luca would smile when he saw her. Matteo would reach for her hair. And for those brief moments, everything felt right. But Antonio never stayed long, never talked about anything real, never let the conversation go deeper than surface pleasantries. How are you feeling today? Better. The stitches are healing well. Good, that's good. Silence. The twins are getting stronger. I can see that, they look healthy. Yes. More silence. Then he'd make an excuse. Something he needed to handle. Someone waiting for him. And he'd take the twins and leave. Maria watched him build walls higher every day. Watched him retreat into the role of grateful employer instead of the man who'd cried in her arms. And she understood. He was protecting himself after everything his wife had done, after trusting someone who'd orchestrated his destruction. He couldn't risk being vulnerable again, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. Sophia and Marco visited often. They'd been moved to a guest suite in the estate, safe, cared for. Sophia would climb carefully onto Maria's bed and tell her about the big house and the nice guards and the food that was so much better than foster care. Marco mostly stayed quiet, but he'd sit close to Maria and hold her hand. When can we go home? Sophia asked one afternoon. Maria's throat tightened. Soon, baby. As soon as I'm all healed. Will Antonio come with us? Maria's heart cracked. No, sweetie. Antonio lives here with his babies. Dr. Castellani cleared her for discharge on a gray Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Elena died. You're healing remarkably well, he said. The infection is gone. The wound is closed. You'll have a scar, but no lasting damage. He smiled. You're free to go. Free. Maria packed her few belongings, the hospital gown, the encrypted phone Antonio had given her, the small bag of clothes Enzo had brought from her apartment. She was folding the last shirt when the door opened. Antonio stood there holding Luca and Matteo. His face was carefully neutral. You're leaving, he said. Not a question. A statement. Maria nodded. Dr. Castellani cleared me. I'm healed enough to go home. Home? Antonio's jaw tightened. To your apartment? I can't stay in the medical wing forever. Antonio. Something flickered in his eyes, then disappeared. Of course not. The twins reached for Maria, Luca's small hands opening and closing. Matteo making the soft sound he always made when he wanted to be held. Maria's vision blurred. She crossed the room and took Matteo into her arms, kissed his forehead, breathed in his baby scent, memorized the weight of him. You're going to be okay, she whispered to him, to both of them. Your daddy loves you. He's going to take such good care of you. She handed Matteo back to Antonio. Their fingers brushed. Antonio's hand trembled slightly, but he didn't say anything. Maria picked up her bag. Sophia and Marco were brought to her, also packed and ready. Sophia tugged on Maria's shirt. Can we say goodbye to the babies? Maria nodded. And Sophia stepped forward carefully and touched Luca's tiny hand. Bye-bye, baby. Marco just stared with wide eyes. Too young to understand, but sensing something important was ending. Maria picked up her bag, took Sophia's hand. Marco grabbed onto her other side. Take care of them, Maria said to Antonio. Her voice was steady even though she was breaking inside. I will. She waited, hoped, prayed he'd say something. Ask her to stay. Tell her these 3 weeks of distance were just fear and he didn't mean it. But Antonio just stood there, silent. Maria walked out, down the hallway, through the main entrance, out into the cold morning air where Enzo was waiting with a car to take her home. She didn't look back. Inside the medical wing, Antonio stood alone with his sons, watched through the window as the car drove away. Nev felt something breaking inside him that had nothing to do with his wife's betrayal. He just let the only woman who'd ever truly loved him walk away because he was too afraid to be vulnerable again. Luca started crying. Then Matteo. Like they knew. Like they understood what their father had just lost. And Antonio held them close and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. 2 weeks after Maria left the estate, Antonio DeLuca stood outside her apartment door and realized he'd never been more terrified in his life. He'd faced rival families, survived assassination attempts, built an empire from blood and fear, but standing here, holding his infant sons and trying to find the courage to knock on a paint-chipped door in a run-down Brooklyn building felt harder than anything he'd ever done. "Boss," Enzo said quietly from behind him. "You sure about this?" Antonio looked down at Luca and Matteo in his arms. They'd been crying every night since Maria left, inconsolable, like they knew something was missing, like they understood their father had made a terrible mistake. "I'm sure," Antonio said, and knocked. Footsteps inside. Light. Hesitant. The door opened. Maria stood there in jeans and an old sweater. And her hair was pulled back. No makeup. She looked tired, beautiful, and completely shocked. "Antonio." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hi." Antonio's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. "Can I come in, please?" Maria's eyes went to the twins, to Luca reaching for her, to Matteo making the soft sound he always made when he wanted to be held. Her expression cracked slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you." Maria hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was tiny, smaller than Antonio remembered. The living room barely fit a couch and a small table, but it was warm. Sophia's drawings covered the refrigerator. Marco's toys were scattered in the corner. It felt like home in a way the estate never had. "Antonio!" Sophia ran over from where she'd been coloring. "You came back!" Marco peered from behind the couch, shy, curious. "Hi, Sophia." Antonio managed a small smile. Then he looked at Maria. "Can we talk?" Maria nodded, gestured to the couch. "Sophia, can you take Marco to your room for a few minutes?" "Okay." Sophia grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him down the hallway. Antonio sat carefully. The twins were getting heavy. Luca started fussing, reaching for Maria. Maria stood across from him, arms crossed, guarded. "What do you want, Antonio?" "I want to apologize." Antonio's voice was steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "For the distance, for letting you leave, for being too afraid to tell you the truth when it mattered." Maria's jaw tightened. "The truth about what?" "That I love you." The words came out raw, honest. "I've loved you since you threw yourself in front of that bullet, maybe even before that. And I let you walk away because I was terrified of being vulnerable again after what my wife did." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. "My wife's betrayal made me afraid to trust anyone," Antonio continued. "But you're not her. You've never been anything but honest and brave and real, and I was a coward. I kept you at a distance because I thought it would protect me, but all it did was hurt both of us." "Why now?" Maria's voice broke. "Why not 2 weeks ago when I was leaving? Why let me go if you loved me?" "Because I was an idiot." Antonio stood slowly. "Because I thought I could live without you, that I could just be grateful and move on. But I can't. The twins can't. We need you, Maria, not because you saved us, but because you're you." Matteo started crying, reaching desperately for Maria. She broke. They crossed the room and took him into her arms. He immediately buried his face in her neck and quieted. Luca whimpered. Maria took him too. held both twins like she'd been aching to do for 2 weeks. Antonio watched her, saw the tears streaming down her face, saw the way she held his sons like they were hers. "I need to tell you something," Antonio said quietly. "You're still technically on the estate payroll. You never formally resigned. But I'm ending your employment right now, effective immediately." Maria looked up, confused. "Because I'm not here as your employer," Antonio continued. "I'm here as a man who loves you, and I'm asking you to be my equal, my partner, not my employee. You already gave me everything financially." Maria's voice was thick with emotion. "You paid my debt. Well, you made it possible for me to adopt Sophia and Marco. I left because I thought that's all you wanted to give me, money, gratitude, but not your heart." Antonio stepped closer. "I was an idiot. I gave you everything except what mattered most." He cupped her face gently, the twins between them. "I'm asking you to be part of our family. You, Sophia, Marco, all of you. Move into the estate. Let me love you the way you deserve. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the bullet you took." "What if you pull away again?" Maria whispered. "What if you wake up one day and regret this? Then you remind me why I came here." Antonio's thumb wiped away her tears. "You remind me that love is worth the risk. That being vulnerable doesn't make me weak. That you're the strongest thing that's ever happened to me." Maria looked at him, and at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the twins in her arms who'd stopped crying the moment she held them, at the man who'd finally broken down every wall he'd built. "Yes," she whispered. Antonio's breath caught. "Yes? Yes." Maria smiled through her tears. "I'll come home with you, all of us." Antonio pulled her close, kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, full of 2 weeks of longing and fear and relief. The twins babbled happily between them. When they finally pulled apart, Antonio rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." Maria's hands were still full of babies, but she leaned into him anyway. "Even when you're an idiot." Antonio laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. 3 hours later, they were packing Maria's tiny apartment. Sophia ran around excitedly telling Marco about the big house and the room they'd have. The twins sat in a playpen Antonio had brought, watching everything with wide eyes. Maria folded clothes while Antonio carried boxes. It felt domestic, normal, right. "What are we going to tell people?" Maria asked. "About us?" Antonio stopped, looked at her. "The truth, that you're the woman I love, that you're going to be a mother to my sons, that we're a family." Maria's eyes filled with tears again, happy ones this time. By evening, everything was packed. Sophia and Marco fell asleep in the car on the drive back to the estate. The twins dozed in their car seats. Antonio reached over and took Maria's hand. She squeezed back. When they pulled up to the estate, Enzo was waiting at the entrance. He saw Maria and smiled. Actually smiled. "Ah, welcome home, Miss Rossi." "Just Maria," she said softly. "Welcome home, Maria." Antonio carried the twins inside. Maria held Sophia's and Marco's hands. They walked through the massive entrance together. A family. That night, after the children were all asleep, Antonio found Maria standing in the nursery, watching Luca and Matteo sleep in their cribs. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissed her temple. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For not giving up on me. For taking a bullet. For loving me when I didn't deserve it. For giving my sons a mother. For everything." Maria turned in his arms, looked up at him. "Thank you for coming back. For choosing love over fear. For letting me in." Antonio kissed her, slow, deep, full of promise. "Now I'm going to spend every day making sure you know you're loved," he whispered against her lips. "And I'm going to remind you every day that vulnerability isn't weakness, that family is everything." They stood in the nursery surrounded by sleeping children, a family built from tragedy and sacrifice and the courage to love again. Outside, the city lights glittered. Inside, everyone was finally home, finally safe, finally loved, together. The end. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt the weight of loving someone who couldn't love themselves, or if you believe that even the most broken souls deserve a second chance at happiness, then hit that like button. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting your heart and taking a risk on love? What would you have done in Maria's position? And if you want more stories about love that heals, families that are chosen, not born, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable when life has taught you to be strong, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone love us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.